Welcome to Connections, a podcast of the JWB Jewish Chaplains Council.
Hello and welcome to the very first edition of Connections, the quarterly podcast of JWB Jewish Chaplains Council. If you haven't figured it out, my name is Rabbi Elson, director of JWB, and today we want to tell you a little bit about this new and exciting project. Connections is a quarterly podcast where we'll explore the various themes and topics related to our annual Jewish Chaplain Training Course. The theme of this year's training course is the military and VA rabbi, prophet, priest, and politician. And during this course, we'll explore the different roles that you are asked to play as a military and a VA chaplain and how you can balance these roles to be the most effective. This year, our training course will be unique in that it will not only take place during a few days in May, but it will actually take place throughout the course of the year. You heard me right. This is a year-long course. Every month, JWB will be sending out the monthly training requirement, being a podcast, a webinar, an article, a book to read, or some other media, and some follow-on questions for you to ponder, all related to our training topic. As always, we encourage you to discuss these topics amongst yourselves and send us your comments and suggestions. So let's get started. Every military and VA chaplain is asked to fulfill many different roles. Like all of you, I struggle to find just the right balance between the different roles that one is asked to play. Certainly there's the ritual role, conducting services, conducting life cycle events, every once in a while actually getting a rabbi question, a shayla, to answer. In addition, all of us had administrative roles, reports to be filled out, evaluations to do, training to be conducted, whether it be for your battalion or for your other units. And finally, like all of you, I also served as the advisor to the commander on matters of morale and welfare. Many times, I'd be called to give him advice, even if he didn't ask for it. And so the question is, how does one balance all of these roles? Is one more important than the other? How do I set my priorities, and how do I inform the command of what my priorities are? JWB was fortunate enough to be invited to interview each of the three chief of chaplains on this particular topic. In this first podcast, we interviewed Chaplain Dondi Costin, Air Force Chief of Chaplains, and Chaplain Margaret Kibbens, Navy Chief of Chaplains. And now, through the magic of podcasts, let's hear what Chaplains Dondi and Kibbens had to say on this important topic. Well, we are here with Rear Admiral Margaret Kibbens, Chief of Navy Chaplains, and this is our first podcast, so thank you so much for joining us today to talk a little bit about our upcoming training course on the different roles that a rabbi plays in the military. As you know, the title of our training this coming year is the Military Rabbi, Prophet, Priest, and Politician, and how the rabbis need to combine these jobs. And let me begin by just asking you a different type of question, and that is, how would you define successful ministry in the military? What's the definition for you?
Well, thanks again for the opportunity to do this. And the fact that I'm the first one out of the batting cage is pretty darn exciting, too. I feel very strongly about, obviously, what chaplaincy is about and what makes a successful chaplain. And I think you've hit on it just by virtue of the subjects that you're looking at. But there's a balance that one strikes as a military chaplain. We've often talked about the balance between the collars and the Navy uniform. It's very visibly obvious. But the reality is we are a profession within a profession. And this idea of serving within the military and the professional expectations that are laid on us as a result of being officers, and how we work within this institution from a hierarchical perspective, from an administrative perspective, all as a part of supporting the team, is so critical. And when we walk into this institution, one has to realize that the military sees us as military members first. And the fact that we happen to also be chaplains is a value added, but not distinct from our military profession. And so the profession within that profession, of course, is then our clergy profession. And our role as representatives of our faith tradition, we have to be well grounded in that. We have to have a keen understanding of who we are as representatives of our faith tradition. We have to have the educational background, we have to have the experiential background, but it isn't just a matter of background, it's a matter of having the wherewithal to be able to draw from that when we find ourselves serving within the institution, whether it's in an isolated situation, whether it's in a staff, whether it's among other chaplains, but certainly within those whom we serve most closely, and that's our sailors, our Marines, our Coast Guardsmen, airmen, and soldiers.
Right. So it's almost like success and synthesis are synonymous.
I think that's a good way to put it. Success is, I think, defined by one's ability to synthesize those two things. Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it.
Great. I've heard you speak once in a while about prophetic voice and using your prophetic voice. So can you tell me a little bit about how do you define your prophetic voice, and how do you see chaplains using that prophetic voice in what they do?
So, you introduced this by saying that you're looking at the rabbi as priest, prophet, and politician. I actually did my D-Min thesis, and it was titled Priest, Prophet, and Sage.
Ah, okay. And maybe we have to change the name of the training.
Politician's an interesting way to look at it, too. But when I was looking at the role as prophet, I think we are all three, however one defines the triad. But our role as prophet is really important in as much as, again, as we strike that balance between military officer and religious ministry professional, the voice we bring into the conversation is different. By its very nature and our role as staff officers, the voice we bring in is different. And that obviously resonates with this idea of prophet. The prophet understands the culture. In our study, in scriptural study, it's obvious that all the prophets who are there know what is going on in that world, but they know it at a different level. And whether it's objectivity or it's a different subjectivity, the voice that they are representing, and certainly in scriptural studies we understand that as the divine voice. That divine voice supersedes the human awareness of what's going on in the day, and that we as chaplains have the ability to speak likewise into a conversation to bring something that otherwise would not be available within the institution in its necessarily myopic perspective. So our prophetic voice is certainly that of the divine, but it's that of the divine as God has called us to care for God's people, the men and women who are serving. And so the institution is caught up necessarily in mission, in platforms, in inspections and execution of their duties, and oftentimes miss the fact that none of those things get accomplished unless we're taking care of the individual. We represent the divine's interest in the individuals who are serving, and that's really where I think the core of our voice as prophet rests.
Right. I heard a great analogy the other day. We talk a lot about boots on the ground, and this person who was speaking said, "Well, chaplains take care of the feet of boots in the boots in the ground."
Oh, that's
so,
awesome. Yeah.
I think it's very good. So I want to focus just a little bit on the politician part, and I did struggle with using that word. Actually, I like the word sage a little bit more, but as far as the chaplain. As a military officer, navigating those waters of promotion, and yet at the same time having that prophetic voice, and of looking out after one's career, and yet having that humility. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about just finding that balance again. How can a chaplain be a successful chaplain, promotion-wise, detailing-wise, and balance that against having to make hard decisions sometimes and using that prophetic voice. Do you see that as a conflict, or?
I think it's certainly a potential conflict. To answer your question, I think I from a theological perspective, I believe we have to start first with our understanding of vocation. or the calling that we have, or an understanding that there's a mantle that's been laid on our shoulders to serve. Whom are we serving? And in all of those things, and maybe the prophet's the one, and the priest certainly represents that most obviously, that we're representing, the divine calling that we've been given and the claim on us. But to do so in an environment that doesn't speak our language, that doesn't necessarily understand what's behind our prophetic or priestly voice, doesn't resonate with them. They're coming from a different lexicon. As a result of that, then the politician, if you will, is the one who has to find the right words that connect. In the purest sense of the word, the politician is a representative. And our roles as representing the divine is finding ways to share what God has spoken to us into words the people understand. And then the representation in an institution, and this is a hard analogy to continue to follow too off the cuff, but the reality is that the politician is the one who has to navigate the waters between whom we represent and where we are representing the divine.
Right. It's interesting because I think the prophet doesn't necessarily always see results for their work. We'd like to see results, but if you look at biblical prophets, they rarely saw results for their work. And yet, navigating in an institution that really wants to see results, sometimes it's hard to show the institution our impact.
Yes.
So that's part of the conflict that we see sometimes.
It is, most definitely. And yet I think, in my thesis, one of the people I relied on very strongly in this idea of sage or politician, if you will, was Nathan. Mm-hmm. And Nathan, though both a priest and a prophet, had incredible wisdom and had the words to be able to represent the divine message to the institution, to David as an example, as a perfect example. And to navigate those waters so carefully that it didn't turn the institution upside down on its head, but that to enter in with a story to David, to share with him, how he was disconnecting with his calling,
right,
with his role, with his responsibility. That, I think, is really where we find ourselves.
Right. Thank you. And one last question. So we say, for the sake of this training, that there's three roles: prophet, priest, and politician or sage. Are there any other roles? Is there a role that we're missing here as far as the roles that a chaplain plays within the institution?
Yeah, peer. I think, as I've never really thought about it as much, and I think I'm really thankful that we've had this conversation so that we can kind of talk through this. But yes, we are priest, prophet, and politician, but we're also peer. And we have, as chaplain corps, I can speak only for the Navy, often neglected our peerage. Mm-hmm. We start off at the chaplain school with a great deal of fellowship. I'm grateful for the fact that you and I are classmates from chaplain school, mm-hmm. and that we've been able to keep our friendship. And I think we do pretty well with the Junior Officer Protection Association, the JOPA, if you will. But how do we look out for each other as we are navigating these waters, as we are trying to strike this balance among all these roles that we have? We need to be looking out for each other more. And the chaplains, I think, that do the best are the ones who acknowledge the fact that it isn't all about me. It's about us as a chaplain corps. And we as a chaplain corps are made up of friends, mm-hmm. and peers and colleagues with different strengths and different abilities and certainly different gifts. And how do we leverage the uniqueness, the diversity that each one of us brings in, whether it's a faith tradition, whether it's a skill set, a rank? How do we leverage the diversity within our chaplain corps to be a community of peers for a common purpose?
Right. Great. That's a great answer. I hadn't thought of it that way, but thank you very much. Chaplain Kibbens, thank you so much for your time. We wish you very happy holidays. So it's a week before Christmas, so we wish you a happy holidays and best of luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for everything.
Well, we hope you enjoyed our first podcast and that it gave you some food for thought as to the different roles that you're asked to play. And that's it from us from the World Headquarters of Jewish Welfare Board Jewish Chaplains Council. This is Rabbi Elson signing off till next time.
You have been listening to Connections, brought to you by the JWB Jewish Chaplains Council, serving those who serve.